I'm glad you're here at Beyond 60 Stories, where every life has a story to tell. There is a quiet truth about relationships after 50 that very few people are warned about. Not because it is rare, but because it is uncomfortable to name. It is the way vulnerability, loneliness, and hope can slowly turn a thoughtful, capable adult into someone who begins to feel powerless inside their own relationship. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, through small compromises that seem reasonable at the time. After 50, relationships carry different weight. We bring history, lost patterns, and unspoken fears into them. We may fear starting over. We may fear being alone. And without realizing it, we may begin to accept dynamics that slowly strip us of agency, clarity, and self-respect, while telling ourselves we are simply being realistic. In today's video, we're exploring the hard truth no one warns you about in relationships over 50. How people become victims without abuse or drama. How love can quietly turn into obligation. And what awareness looks like when it arrives before resentment does. Before we continue, take a moment to tap the like button and subscribe to Beyond 60 Stories. This channel exists to slow the conversation down and offer reflections shaped by time, experience, and emotional honesty. Lesson 1. How good intentions slowly become self-betrayal. Many people over 50 enter relationships with good intentions and hard-earned wisdom, believing that maturity means flexibility, patience, and understanding. Yet what is rarely discussed is how these virtues can quietly turn against us when they are practiced without boundaries. I learned this through watching a relationship unfold slowly, one that never looked unhealthy from the outside, one that would have been described as calm, reasonable, and adult, yet carried a quiet imbalance that grew heavier with time. It began with small accommodations that felt sensible. A preference ignored here, a need postponed there. Nothing dramatic, nothing that justified alarm. The relationship felt stable because there was no overt conflict, and stability can be very seductive later in life when chaos has already been survived. What was not noticed at first was how often one person adjusted while the other remained unchanged, how compromise slowly moved in only one direction. I remember a moment when the realization surfaced quietly, not during an argument but during an ordinary evening. Two people sitting together, the television on, conversation light and polite. Yet one of them felt strangely absent from their own life. There was no anger, no betrayal, just a subtle sense of being reduced to a role rather than met as a person. That is often how victimhood begins after 50, not with harm, but with disappearance. Over time, the language of responsibility replaced the language of desire. Choices were framed around what was practical, what was easier, what avoided disruption. The person who adapted told themselves they were being mature, that this was simply how relationships worked at this stage of life. But maturity, when it asks only one person to shrink, becomes quiet self-betrayal. What makes this especially dangerous later in life is the fear of starting over. Many people over 50 carry the belief that this is their last chance at companionship, and that belief encourages endurance, even when dignity begins to erode. They tell themselves that no relationship is perfect, that loneliness is worse, that asking for more is unrealistic. These thoughts do not arrive as warnings. They arrive as reasonable conclusions. The hard truth is that becoming a victim in a relationship after 50 rarely involves cruelty. It involves consent given too many times against your own inner voice. It involves choosing peace over clarity, comfort over truth, and stability over self-respect. And because these choices are made slowly, they are difficult to recognize until they have already reshaped how you see yourself. Awareness does not arrive with accusation. It arrives with a quiet question. When did I stop being fully here? Not blaming the other person, not dramatizing the past, but noticing where your presence faded in order to keep the relationship intact. That noticing is the first step out of victimhood, not through confrontation, but through clarity. In the next part, we will step away from story and look closely at the patterns that make this kind of self-erasure feel normal. and why intelligent, capable people are often the most vulnerable to it after 50. Lesson 2. Why intelligent adults become weanable later in life. One of the least discussed realities of relationships over 50 is that vulnerability does not decrease with experience. It changes shape. Intelligence, emotional literacy, and life experience can create a false sense of immunity, as if understanding patterns automatically protects us from them. In truth, these qualities can make people more vulnerable when they are paired with exhaustion, loss, or the quiet fear of starting over. Later in life, many people value peace more than possibility. They have survived upheaval, raised families, endured careers, and carried responsibilities that required strength. When they enter or remain in a relationship, they often prioritize calm, predictability, and emotional efficiency. These priorities are reasonable, yet they can quietly lower the threshold for what is tolerated. What once would have felt unacceptable now feels negotiable. Weanability after 50 is rarely dramatic. It shows up as over-explaining instead of being heard, as self-editing instead of being known, as taking responsibility for emotional climates you did not create. The desire to keep things stable can lead to taking on more emotional labor than is fair, not because you are unaware but because you are capable. Capability becomes the reason you absorb. Imbalance. Another factor is the internal narrative about time. Many people believe there is less room for correction later in life. They tell themselves that relationships are meant to be worked through, not reimagined, and that asking for change at this stage is unrealistic. This belief encourages endurance rather than discernment. It makes people stay alert to the other person's comfort, while becoming less attentive to their own. Becoming a victim in this way does not involve manipulation or cruelty. It involves slow erosion of self-trust. When your instincts are repeatedly overridden in the name of reason, your inner voice grows quieter. You begin to doubt whether discomfort is meaningful or simply sensitivity. Over time, clarity feels disruptive and silence feels safer. What restores balance is not confrontation but recognition. Recognition that wisdom includes listening to discomfort rather than explaining it away. Recognition that maturity does not mean minimizing yourself. Recognition that peace purchased with self-betrayal is fragile. When these recognitions begin to form, agency returns naturally. You stop managing emotions and start honoring them. If this reflection resonates with you, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. What belief about age or maturity made you tolerate something longer than you should have? Your insight may help someone else recognize a pattern they are still inside. Lesson 3. The moment Warna quietly returns your dignity. Warna rarely arrives as a dramatic awakening later in life. It does not come with shouting or ultimatums. It comes quietly, often during an ordinary moment when nothing appears to be changing except something inside you finally does. I witnessed this in a relationship that had lasted long enough to feel permanent, stable enough to seem unquestionable, yet subtly draining in ways that were difficult to explain. The realization did not emerge during conflict. It appeared one afternoon during a simple conversation about plans. The words exchanged were reasonable, even kind, but one person noticed how automatically they had adjusted their expectations without being asked, how instinctively they made room while assuming the other would not. It was not resentment that surfaced, but clarity. A clear recognition of a familiar pattern repeating itself without discussion or consent. What made this moment powerful was its calmness. There was no urge to correct the other person, no need to justify feelings, no desire to assign blame. There was simply the recognition that dignity had been slowly traded for harmony, and that harmony had not actually brought closeness. This realization did not end the relationship, but it changed how one person stood within it. From that moment on, small choices shifted, not through confrontation, but through presence. Pauses replaced automatic agreement. Silence replaced over-explaining. Needs were acknowledged internally before being negotiated externally. The relationship did not collapse, nor did it suddenly improve. What changed was the internal posture of the person who had been shrinking. This is the overlooked truth about relationships over 50. You do not reclaim dignity by leaving immediately or demanding transformation. By noticing when you disappear, by allowing discomfort to exist without rushing to smooth it over. These shifts are subtle, yet they recalibrate the entire emotional dynamic. Interestingly, the other person often senses this change without it being spoken. Energy adjusts, conversations feel different, expectation recalibrate. Sometimes the relationship grows healthier. Either outcome carries integrity, because it is no longer driven by fear of loss, but by clarity of self. What matters most is that awareness restores choice. You are no longer enduring by default. You are participating consciously. This is not about becoming guarded or rigid. It is about becoming present again in your own life. At this stage of life, dignity is not loud. It is steady. It does not demand. It stands. In the next part, we will step away from story again and look at why many people mistake endurance for love after 50 and how this confusion quietly keeps them trapped far longer than necessary. Lesson 4. Why endurance is often mistaken for love after 50. One of the most persistent misunderstandings in relationships later in life is the belief that endurance equals depth. Many people over 50 take pride in how much they can tolerate, how calmly they can absorb disappointment, how little they demand. This endurance is often praised as maturity, yet it quietly replaces a more honest measure of love. Mutual presence. Endurance feels noble because it looks like commitment. It appears steady, patient, and responsible. But love, especially later in life, is not proven by how much you can withstand. It is revealed by how much of yourself you are allowed to remain. When endurance becomes the main currency of connection, something essential has already been lost. Even if nothing appears broken. After 50, people are often reluctant to disrupt what works on the surface. They fear instability more than dissatisfaction. They believe that asking for emotional reciprocity is unreasonable at this stage, that wanting to be met fully is a luxury reserved for the young. This belief keeps many intelligent adults quietly over-functioning in relationships that depend on their emotional restraint to survive. The danger of endurance is not that it hurts immediately, it is that it normalizes absence. Over time, you stop expecting responsiveness. You stop noticing when conversations revolve around logistics rather than connection. You stop naming what you miss. Love becomes something you maintain rather than experience. This confusion is reinforced by cultural narratives about aging. We are told to be grateful for companionship, to lower expectations, to be realistic. Gratitude, however, is not the same as self-erasure. Realism does not require silence. When endurance replaces expression, love loses its vitality and becomes an arrangement. Recognizing this distinction does not require blame, it requires honesty. Honesty about where endurance has become a substitute for intimacy. Honesty about the cost of staying quiet. Honesty about whether what you are preserving is truly connection or simply familiarity. Lesson 5. When self-respect becomes non-negotiable, everything clarifies. There is a quiet shift that happens later in life when self-respect stops being something we hope for and becomes something we insist on, not loudly, not defensively, but steadily. It often follows years of accommodation, patience, and endurance that once felt generous and mature yet slowly revealed their cost. This shift does not arrive with anger. It arrives with exhaustion, and then with clarity. I recall a moment shared by someone who had spent decades believing that love meant adapting, smoothing, and holding things together. There was no single betrayal, no obvious harm. Just a growing awareness that the relationship required constant self-containment. One evening during an ordinary exchange, they noticed something subtle but irreversible. They were no longer asking themselves what would keep the peace, but what would allow them to remain whole. From that moment on, the question changed. Not how do I make this work, but at what cost? That question alone began to reorganize everything. Decisions became simpler, not easier, but clearer. Self-respect did not demand confrontation. It simply refused participation in dynamics that required self-erasure. This is what many people misunderstand about boundaries. After 50, boundaries are not punishments. They are disclosures. They reveal what a relationship can and cannot hold. When self-respect becomes non-negotiable, some connections deepen because they were capable of meeting you there. Others quietly fall away, not because you pushed them out, but because they depended on your silence to survive. What remains is not loneliness, but integrity, a sense of being aligned with yourself again. Conversations feel cleaner, joys feel calmer. You no longer negotiate your presence, you offer it where it is received. This does not harden the heart, it frees it from performing. Later in life, love does not ask us to prove our endurance, it asks us to arrive intact. When self-respect leads, relationships either adjust or reveal their limits, and both outcomes are honest. That honesty is the opposite of victimhood. As this conversation comes to a close, what remains is not a warning, but an invitation to notice. Relationships over 50 do not fail because people care too little. They fail quietly when caring replaces presence, when endurance replaces choice, and when silence becomes the price of staying connected. The truth is that no one becomes a victim all at once. It happens through habits that once felt loving, through adjustments that once felt mature, and through patience that slowly outlived its purpose. Awareness does not demand dramatic decisions. It asks for honesty in small moments, in how you sit, how you speak, how you remain when something no longer feels mutual. Later in life, dignity is not something to be negotiated. It is something you either stand inside of or step away from. When you choose presence over endurance, relationships reveal their nature without force. Some adapt, some end, and both outcomes carry clarity. If this video touched you in some way, hit like and subscribe to Beyond 60 Stories. Your presence helps us continue telling stories for those who have lived long enough to understand the value of truth.